This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel, broadcasting remotely. The presidential election is less than 1 month away, and it's an election season none of us will forget. The president has returned to the White House after being hospitalized with COVID, while his opponent, Joe Biden, is getting tested regularly. And this has all affected how they would normally campaign. Meanwhile, next month, Connecticut residents will vote in important congressional and Connecticut General Assembly races. But the pandemic has altered how these candidates, too, interact with the public. And there are plenty of questions about voting during a pandemic. Today, Where We Live, we ask Connecticut Secretary of the State Denise Merrill to join us for the full hour to answer our questions and yours. Here's the number, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Now, this week, Connecticut Public Radio has begun its fall membership drive, and our show was slated to be shorter to accommodate pledge breaks. But my producers and I felt it was important to give you as much time to hear from our chief elections official and take your questions, so we suspended the fund drive for this hour. You can still support Where We Live in Connecticut Public Radio with the pledge anytime at our website, WNPR.org. Now, I want to welcome back to the show on Zoom today, Denise Merrill, Connecticut Secretary of the State. Denise, welcome back.
Thank you, Lucy. Good morning.
So if I counted correctly, we're 28 days out until the election. There's a lot of questions still about the health of the president. More Americans will vote by absentee ballot than ever before. It leads to a lot of questions about voting. Can you describe the scene right now in towns across the state, Secretary of the State Denise Merrill, as they prepare for a record number of ballots?
It's, shall we say, busy would be one word for it. As you know, Connecticut was not really poised to do a huge volume of absentee ballots. And we've talked about this before. We're very restrictive in Connecticut. We usually get about 5% of people who use absentee ballots, mostly because they're out of town on election day. This year, due to action by both the governor and the legislature, anyone is allowed to request an absentee ballot based on the fear of COVID. So there is an enormous volume. So for the primary, we saw between 68 and 70% of the voters voted by absentee ballot. So you can see the enormous increase, and that is straining our system, no question about it.
So as of Friday, towns began to mail out absentee ballots for people who sent in their applications already. How many ballot requests have been processed to date, Denise?
As of last week, about 476,000 have been requested by applications that we mailed out earlier. And they're still coming in. I would think that the rest of October, people will still be requesting absentee ballots. So who knows where we'll end up? I'm assuming around 500,000.
Now, coming up, we're going to hear from the women who lead the Connecticut Town Clerks Association, as well as the president of the Registrars of Voters Association of Connecticut, to hear more about what's happening on the ground. You mentioned the number of people that voted by absentee ballot in our August primary, but when we think about some of the lessons learned from the lead up to the primary, how have those issues been resolved this time for the general election?
Well, the first problem was that there was so little public information about filing absentee ballots. There was a lot of confusion, and I think we've got a lot more information now. People have been through it once. A lot of people thought they were going to get mailed a ballot, not the application only. And there's a lot of process that goes into all this. We did try to mail ballots centrally for the primary, but knowing that represents only about half of the registered voters, because you had to be registered with a party to vote in the primary. We realized that trying to mail out 500 different ballot types from a central mail house was going to be really challenging. It was hard enough that first time in the primary. So we reverted to the usual system, which is that the town clerks do all mailing of ballots. Usually they mail the applications as well when they're requested, but we did do that part of it. So one thing we learned was that with our system the way it is right now, it's better to just keep things local as much as possible, even though that did put an extra burden, I think, on the town clerks. So we did mail out, sent out great deal of resources, shall we say, over $2 million we sent to the town so that they could hire extra staffing and whatever they needed. That still is a challenge, but I think it's a better system now, and the public's been through it once, so I think that's helped too.
So unlike the primary, this time around, city and town clerks are responsible for the printing and mailing of the absentee ballot. So that money that you mentioned, can they use that to help offset the costs?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
In fact, that's the point. We're printing ballots the same way we always have. So don't forget, we have to be ready not only for a big volume of absentee ballots, but we have to be ready in case people decide at the end they'd rather vote in person. And so we kind of have to create a dual system, assuming that everyone makes a choice either way, because this is really just an option. The polling places have been also made quite safe, I think. We provided funding for PPE and extra staffing for polling places as well. So, I think that's the question, is how you plan for all this when it's a first time really that we've tried to do this on a massive scale.
You can join our conversation if you have a question about voting. We know a lot of you do. The number 888-720-9677. As Denise Merrill is here, the Connecticut Secretary of the state. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. We did hear from Jeremy, who tweeted, what happens if you request an absentee ballot and then decide you want to vote in person instead?
Aha, see? Just what I was saying. I think people are not certain yet, in many cases, what they're going to do in the end, because it might depend on whether we have a big spike in COVID in the next few weeks. We're seeing already this disease can change in a moment's notice. So the answer to that is, because of the many, many checks and balances we have, as long as you haven't actually filed and voted absentee, you are still able to go to the polling place. But of course, you have to discard the absentee ballot, so it won't be used.
So Caroline had also tweeted she wants to mask up and go in person, but she also requested an absentee ballot just in case, depending on what's happening close to the election. And again, the worry that people think that if you request the absentee ballot, it'll remove your name from the polling place. You're saying that's not correct. Requesting an absentee ballot will not remove your name. It's only if you send it back in.
That's correct. And I want to mention something that's kind of a new program we have, which is a sort of rudimentary ballot tracking system. Many states have much more robust ballot tracking devices, but we had to put it in place pretty quickly. But you now can go to myvote.ct.gov/lookup and look up your name and your address, and it will reflect there whether or not your absentee ballot request has been logged in by the local clerks. And then it will also log in the end. If you return that ballot, it'll log in when it gets logged in as received. And so I think there's a better way for people and voters to know whether their ballot's been sent back and received, hence voted. And that, I think, will save on the thousands of phone calls we were getting during the primary, both we and the local officials, about, well, has my ballot gone in? I want to make sure that I voted and I sent it in, but I'm not sure about the mail and so forth. So I think it's best to know all that. And frankly, I would recommend everyone look up your name and address and make sure you're properly registered at that website. You just put in your name, your address, and you can see what party you're registered with, where you vote, and also, as I say, there'll be a place to track the absentee ballot.
And can you repeat that website again, Denise?
Sure. myvote.ct.gov/lookup.
Now, it's hard to believe just a week ago, it was the first 2020 presidential debate. Everyone watching remembers some of the claims President Donald Trump made about mail-in ballots. And I wanted to hear from you as our chief elections official. What are the questions you're getting now from Connecticut residents who worry about their vote being counted if they choose to vote by absentee ballot?
Yes, the worst thing about what the president said that night was that your ballot is not safe. Your vote is not safe if you vote by absentee ballot. I just think that nothing could be further from the truth, honestly. We have, in Connecticut at least, I can only speak for Connecticut, but because there are different rules in many different states. But here we have many checks and balances, as you can witness from the fact that the first point is you have to request an absentee ballot. We do not mail ballots to every voter on the list, contrary to many other states. And then when your absentee ballot is received, the request is received, your ballot comes in 2 different envelopes. Those envelopes are, you vote, you put your ballot in the inner envelope, and it is sealed, and you sign it. And then you put that in an outer envelope, and that envelope goes to the town clerk. Again, very local process, right to your town. That town clerk will log in the barcode that's on the outside. So again, another question I get is my information being revealed because it's on the outer envelope? It's a barcode, it is logged in, and that way we know exactly who requested that ballot. So there are many other processes after that also to ensure that your absentee ballot is recorded once, that you cannot vote again, because that is recorded on the lists that we use on election day. So, and there are ways that we have of tabulating results on election day that mean that those results will reflect when your absentee ballot is counted. Therefore, you can't come in on election day and vote again. So we've been doing this since 1832. I think everyone can feel safe and secure with their ballot. Now, we have had questions about the Postal Service. I'm not sure I can guarantee that if you have less than, let's say, 5 days to mail your ballot back, that it surely will get there. So we have encouraged people to use ballot boxes, which are terrific. They are outside of every town hall. And so if you really want to be sure that your ballot arrives, drop it in the ballot box, and the clerks pick them up, and they can speak to how often that happens. I think it's pretty much every day now. And so I think raising these fears of, ballots being thrown in the river and so forth is very unfortunate, because all it does is make people distrust their elections. And honestly, I don't think there's any reason to distrust any of this. It's very well managed.
Now, because of the unprecedented number of absentee ballots that town clerks will be sending out and also logging into the centralized voting registration system, can you talk about where the primary work should be happening? I'm referencing a story that Hearst, Connecticut did, where a Hamden town clerk, Vera Morrison, her office had handled more than 4,750 requests. So she brought mailing labels home and asked her family to help out. And I'm wondering, when you hear about that, because again, there's so much work that needs to be done and they maybe can't get it done in a work day. Should town clerks be taking that work home to finish? What would you say, Secretary of the State Merrill?
Well, I'm not sure it's that big a problem if you're simply labeling at home. But I mean, right now we're using volunteers. We're using all kinds of people to help us facilitate the processing end. Don't forget, this is just processing of all the paperwork that we have in place to get these ballots to people, to get the applications out and get them back. None of that is worrisome in the sense that, the tabulation, everything we do that is about your actual ballot is done on election day. And we haven't changed that, except to allow, I guess, the registrars can open the outer envelopes now to sort of facilitate some of this.
And that'll happen 4 days prior? The opening of the outer envelope?
Yeah, Friday night. They're able to open the outer envelope only, which of course does not contain your ballot directly. Your ballot is still sealed inside the inner envelope. But it's one step we could take away from election day. Because the worry is, if you have to do all of this on election day, and I want to remind people that absentee ballots are counted the exact same way other ballots are. In other words, they're run through those same tabulators that are used for regular, in-person voting. So that means there's an awful lot to do on election day. And there is, of course, some concern that, election day could go on and on if we can't get everything counted in time. And so there was the recent legislation allows the registrars to open the outer envelope in advance. So that's just one step they won't have to do on election day. And they will open those on Friday, starting Friday, if they wish to. I mean, some towns, I would bet you that probably at least half the towns are very small and are going to be able to work on all this just fine. It'll be easier for them to accomplish what they need to accomplish in a small town, I think. You know, the larger cities will have more of a challenge. But it's, I think we're in a good place here in terms of getting everything done. And I don't think people should worry about that part of it.
Again, Connecticut Secretary of the State Denise Merrill is here on Where We Live to answer your voting questions, whether it's about absentee ballots or even going to vote in person if that is your choice. The number 888-720-9677. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Steve is calling in from Goshen. Steve, you're on the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Merrill, for some very helpful information. As we've seen early voting proceed around the country, there have been cases of armed militia groups showing up menacingly outside of polling places. I'm wondering what steps you and other officials in Connecticut are taking to prevent this kind of voter intimidation in Connecticut.
Oh, thank you for the question. You know, when you think about what keeps me up at night, that might be one of them. And we are taking steps to ensure that we don't have that kind of disruption at our polling places. I would say I have never seen an example of that in Connecticut in the past, but we are certainly prepared, and we have been for years. We have a working relationship with the law enforcement agencies, such as the FBI, and now the Department of Homeland Security, because, of course, as many of you know, there have been other forms of attempted disruption of our elections through Russian interference, trying to get into our voter registry, perhaps change data. We don't really know. So we have an ongoing communication structure with these law enforcement agencies. If anything gets reported, we have a hotline on Election Day. Any citizen can call in and raise questions about any kind of behavior at the polling places. This is strictly forbidden in Connecticut by state law, and we are already preparing. We've done some exercises even with the groups that we work with to try to anticipate if we have any of this sort of thing, what we would do and how we would react. I also have a volunteer program with attorneys around the state who it's been in place for many years. And my volunteer attorney program has about 100 attorneys who have agreed to go if we hear something on our hotline that there's some sort of disruption in a polling place or people pretending to be law enforcement agents and that sort of thing, that they would be able to go and ascertain if there's really anything damaging or harmful going on at a polling place. So it's just sort of an extension of what we always do on Election Day. We do that. We're poised for this every year. And I guess we're on higher alert this year as a result of some of the things you've seen.
Leanne's calling in from Kent. Leanne, what's your question?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I'm so glad you're doing this show. We all have questions. Mine has to do with the signature requirement on the absentee ballot. I just received mine in the mail the other day, and the mailing label just has my first name and my last name, but I do have a middle name, and when I typically sign my name, sometimes I spell out my middle name, sometimes I put my middle initial in. But I'm just wondering, when I go to sign the ballot, given that the mailing label only has my first and last name, should I sign it using only my first and last name? Can I put my middle initial? Can I spell out my whole middle name? I don't want to invalidate my ballot because I've put extra or not put enough. So, on the signature.
Good question.
Okay. Yes, you don't need to worry. In Connecticut, we do not use a signature matching protocol per se. And so you don't need to worry if you signed up 20 years ago and your signature has changed and all that. We use the signature to just verify who you are on the voter list. And so I know I get this question a lot because some states do use that kind of a protocol, mostly states who have vote by mail as their only form of voting virtually. So we do not. The signature is checked against the list just to make sure you are the person who's filing that ballot. So you don't need to worry about the signature.
So just to clarify, if she were to put her middle initial, but her middle initial's not on the mailing label, not on the absentee ballot, her ballot will not get disqualified.
Correct.
Good to know. You can add your question again or ask your question to Connecticut Secretary of the State Denise Merrill here on Where We Live. Here's the number, 888-720-9677. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. We'll be back right after a short break. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Got a voting question? Did you request an absentee ballot but haven't made up your mind whether you'll vote in person? Or maybe you already dropped off or mailed the ballot back to your town clerk. We want to hear from you today. 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Now, we interrupted our pledge drive this hour to make sure we did not lose time in the hour to take your calls, your questions about voting in November. You can still support WNPR anytime by going online to WNPR.org. My guest today on Zoom, Denise Merrill, Connecticut Secretary of the State. In just a few minutes, we're going to hear from Anna Posniak, Town Clerk in Windsor, Connecticut. She's also president of the Connecticut Town Clerks Association. But I wanted to ask Secretary of the State Denise Merrill. Miriam called in and she wanted to know, how are people being reminded to fill in the absentee ballot correctly? Can you walk us through the steps?
Yes, and I was going to mention that after the last call, that the things that will disqualify your absentee ballot, and I'll walk you through the steps just so you understand. When you get your absentee ballot, it will have two envelopes. There's a smaller one that's we call the inner envelope, and it'll have a lot of writing on it and a place for you to sign. And then there's the outer envelope, and then there's the ballot. So the ballot is anonymous. You do not put your name on your ballot. You simply fill it out with the candidate of your choice. You fold it, you put it in the inner envelope. And then there's two things that will disqualify your ballot. If you don't sign the inner envelope, you will be disqualified because we won't know for sure who sent that in. And if you don't seal that envelope for the same reason, it could have been tampered with if it's not sealed. Also, you cannot put more than one ballot in the inner envelope. We have had that happen occasionally, thinking that maybe they're saving time or postage or something. No, only one ballot in the inner envelope, must be sealed, must be signed. Then it's placed in the outer envelope, which has the barcode on the outside so that the clerks or the registrars, the clerks log in the absentee ballot as having been received. And that way the actual anonymity of your ballot is preserved, but also we can make sure that the same person sent that ballot back. Then you would mail that ballot back in the outer envelope, and that would be on the outside. And it should be postage paid if it's in the newer envelopes that we used. And that way you can just simply drop it in the mail or the ballot boxes, which will, of course, if you can get down to town hall and drop it in a ballot box, it's quicker. And time is of the essence this year. You know, the ballots probably are just being received now because of our timeline in Connecticut on ballots. So, you know, you don't have a lot of time to mail it back. So mail it back quickly if you're going to mail it, or drop it in the ballot box. It will be then received by the town clerk, who will scan in the barcode on the outside of the envelope, and then it is deemed received.
George is calling in from Woodbury. George, what's your question?
Hi, I have a question. I just filled mine out and sealed it all up, and it's sitting on my table ready to go. But I had some concerns and something that was just said about that town clerks have the option of looking at opening these things up, the outside envelope, before Election Day or not. And I would guess that whole two envelope thing is to make sure that they can write down that I've already voted. And if they don't do that, what's to stop me, if I were a nefarious character, from showing up on voting day and voting a second time? I would think that the envelope was critical to that thing there.
Yes, thanks for the question. No, because the outer envelope is the one that has the logged in for lack of a better word, you would be logged in with the barcode that's on the outer envelope. So that envelope becomes unnecessary to the actual processing of the vote because it's already logged in. So in other words, once they receive that ballot and they scan that barcode, and it goes onto the list, that will be printed on election day next to your name. So I'm not sure exactly what it looks like, but when they print out, we still have paper lists on election day at the polling places. There will be a little AB somewhere next to your name, which indicates you have already voted AB. So you would not be allowed to vote again.
I wanted to bring into the conversation Anna Posniak. She's the town clerk in Windsor, Connecticut, also president of the Connecticut Town Clerks Association. Anna, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, Lucy and Secretary Merrill. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this important discussion today.
A flurry of activity for town clerks around the state who are also responsible for other duties, now sending out these absentee ballots for people who turned in these absentee ballot applications earlier. And then lots of questions. Again, we just heard from a listener about the inner envelope, outer envelope. So tell us, with this new law that was signed just Friday, I believe, how that will help town clerks do the work when these ballots come back to you, and to make sure that nothing happens to these votes before they're counted.
So the new bill will allow towns to have the option 4 days ahead of the election to begin opening only the outer envelope. We will remove the inner envelope, and then from there, those envelopes would be secured until election day. And at 6 a.m. on election day is when the counters who the registrar voters hire would then open those inner envelopes and begin the process of inserting the ballots into the tabulators, much like voters do at the polls. So the law really assists the registrar voters with tabulating the results on election day. It really doesn't assist the town clerks with processing ahead of the election.
And what are you hearing from town clerks around the state now that this law has been passed, as well as just the process as we get ready for November 3rd, Anna?
So there have been many questions regarding the bill, and we're waiting to hear from the Secretary of the State's office regarding procedures on how we handle those ballots if a town does decide to utilize the bill to assist with being able to process the ballots on election day more efficiently.
Secretary of the State Denise Merrill, Jake tweeted at us, if we send in our mail-in ballot in a timely manner and it's rejected for whatever reason, are we notified so then they can vote in person? How is that built into this bill, if at all?
It is sort of built into the bill in the sense that once you open that outer envelope, and let's say someone forgot to sign it, just as an example, the inner envelope, that is, if there's time, and I think this is not a requirement, but if there is time, many town clerks will try to call you and let you know that your ballot needs curing, what we call curing. That only works if when you fill out the application, there is a place to put your phone number and your email address. Now, if you haven't put those on the application, they would have no way of contacting you. So if there is a way to contact you, they will do that. We actually have had not that many mistakes of that kind made in Connecticut in the past. But of course, like we said, only 5% of people were using absentee ballots. So we will, of course, attempt to cure ballots that are either unsealed or have, missing a signature or anything like that. But we don't always catch it.
Anna Posniak, again, we're hearing that town clerks have been sending out these ballots starting, I think, October 2nd. So when somebody sends in their application, maybe they haven't done it yet, and they're like, you know what, I'm going to vote absentee. How soon should they expect to receive their actual ballot?
So in accordance to Public Act 20-03, we now have 48 hours to process absentee ballot applications. I can assure all voters across the state that town clerks are processing the applications as quickly as they come in. They're not waiting the full 48 hours. And then from there, we mail the ballots to the voters. So voters need to know that the post office takes 2 to 3 days to mail local mail. So it could take anywhere from 2 to 4 days before they receive their ballot.
Mm. And given, again, the number of ballots that are going to be coming back, can you talk a little bit about how this federal money that's gone to towns such as Windsor and others, how that would help town clerks and others do their work by helping to process, considering the more that you have on your plate this time around?
Absolutely. So town clerks across the state are utilizing the grant funds to hire additional staff people to come in. We used the money to purchase new computers. We purchased printers, label printers. Each one of the envelopes has 2 separate labels that we need to affix to the envelopes. We have been buying filing cabinets just because the sheer volume of applications we have, we don't have anywhere to store them. So something as simple as a filing cabinet we need to purchase. All the absentee ballots that are going out in the mail have to have postage on them. And so it's at 65 cents each. So the towns are paying for those at the local level. But I would say the bulk of the money is being used for staff to help with processing the high volume of applications we are currently receiving.
Mm. Denise Merrill, you mentioned earlier that people have been volunteering, and I'm just wondering what the training process is like to help towns across our state process these ballots.
Well, I would ask Anna, but basically the volunteers are being used, I'm sure, in different ways. And thank goodness we have people stepping up to do volunteering, not just with the processing of the ballots, but also on election day itself, because I do think we are going to need extra help. But again, this is all managed locally. The clerk or registrars in that particular town are the ones that decide exactly what kind of help they need and how they train them to do it, because it's done in different ways in different towns. A large city, for example, might have a very large office and a very large staff and have more equipment, more printers, more file cabinets, more space, that sort of thing. And then on the other hand, some towns, space is a huge issue right now, I'm sure, because town halls were virtually closed for a while, but also, if you suddenly have to process thousands of ballots in let's say a mid-sized town, where are you going to do all that? If you can't really take over town hall. So, space, I think, is a big issue. Is that right, Anna? I'm just guessing here, but I can imagine that's the case.
That is correct. Space is an issue for every single town. It's fortunate that many of the town halls are still closed. Some of our larger, like for instance, West Hartford has taken over their entire council chambers with setting up all of their part-time staff that are assisting with processing the over 15,000 absentee ballots that have gone out in the mail already. So space is absolutely an issue because we do have to be certain that we are maintaining social distancing, and we need to keep all of our election workers healthy and safe.
Priscilla's calling in from West Hartford. Priscilla, what's your question?
Hi, thank you. I have requested and received an absentee ballot, but I really would like to vote at the polls. I do have a medical condition that makes me concerned about COVID, so what I was hoping to do was to go to the polls on the day of the election and see how the line was, see what the weather is like, and then if I wasn't able to stay and vote, then to slip my ballot into the box at the town hall. And I'm wondering, how late can I put my ballot in that box and have it be counted?
Denise?
If that's for me, you have until 8 o'clock to drop that absentee ballot in the ballot box, and it will be counted. I like to take this opportunity to let people know that that's why we wait until 8 o'clock to count all absentee ballots, because we want to make sure that someone doesn't vote twice. So the way we do that is any ballot that's received on election day that didn't make the little AB on the list is held aside. And then at the end of the night, it's compared against the list of people who did vote. And if someone has already voted, the absentee ballot is simply discarded.
Before we head to break, we did get an interesting comment on Facebook. Secretary of the State Merrill. Lori writes, can you mention newly registered voters need to include a photocopy of their ID in the envelope? My daughter almost missed this detail. I'm thinking she may not be alone. Is this correct?
Say that again.
She said that newly registered voters need to include a photocopy of their ID in the envelope. I'm guessing she's talking about when she sends back the absentee ballot. Is that necessary?
I don't think so. But I gather what she's talking about is sending in the application. Is she talking about? I can't tell if she's talking about the voter registration itself, because most of that is online. And if you go to register to vote at this point, most people go in person to their registrars. I'm not clear on exactly what process she's talking about. I don't know if, I know Sue Larsen's on the line. She would probably know better than I how this is handled at the local level.
Okay, we'll pose that question to Sue after the break. But Anna Posniak, again, you're a town clerk. You head the Town Clerk Association. Anything else you want our listeners to know about the process and the work that town clerks are doing statewide?
I would like for the voters of Connecticut to be confident in the system and that town clerks will get the absentee ballots to all voters. Anyone who wants to vote at the polls on election day, they're open and they're safe, but we are highly encouraging every voter in this state to have a backup plan. So request an absentee ballot ahead of time. You can hold on to that absentee ballot, and if you find yourself the week before the election being quarantined because you unfortunately came in contact with someone, you now have a ballot at your house that you can vote. If you do not submit that ballot to the town clerk's office, you can go to the polls on election day. But please have a backup plan and do not delay. Please submit the applications early and then your voted ballots back to us early as well.
That's Anna Posniak, Town Clerk in Windsor, Connecticut, also President of the Connecticut Town Clerks Association. Anna, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you.
This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Denise Merrill, Connecticut Secretary of the State, will stay with us to answer your questions. We're also going to hear from the woman who leads Connecticut's Registrars Association. Also, are you planning on voting in person? We'll find out more about how you will stay safe, as well as election workers the day of the election. Again, you can stay with us as we take your calls. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. My guest today, Denise Merrill, Connecticut Secretary of the State, and also joining us now on Zoom, Sue Larsen, Registrar of Voters in South Windsor, Connecticut, also President of Registrars of Voters Association of Connecticut. Sue, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to sharing this time with Secretary Merrill and all of you at NPR.
We don't have too much time left, Sue, but tell us again, we now have this law to help the absentee ballots, the outer envelopes be opened 4 days prior to November 3rd. Can you talk about how the process has been going and what needs to happen between now and November 3rd to help registrars of voters do the best job possible?
Well, right now, I think most of us are in the process of making sure we have enough poll workers. The Secretary of the State and the Governor's office have provided us with lists of volunteers that we're all looking at and calling and finding out if they're still willing to work and what their capabilities are as far as can they work a full day? Are they offering time just later in the evenings? So we're putting our poll worker list together. At the same time, we're double checking all of our PPE to make sure we have enough PPE for the poll workers. And the Secretary of the State's office did send us a box of face masks, face shields, hand sanitizer for the poll workers. But at the same time, we're looking to make sure we have enough masks for the voters, that we have some form of taping so that we can do social distancing. Some towns are using circles, others are using blue painter's tape, masking tape, all of that kind, to make sure that when the poll worker does come to their polling locations, they can feel safe and secure that we've done everything possible for them.
Sue, we did get a question from a listener who writes, if a person shows up at a polling place to vote November 3rd and they have their temperature checked before entering, how can they vote if their temperature is elevated and they're not allowed to enter the polling location?
Well, we have a situation where it's called curbside voting. It's used for temporary situations where a person cannot go into the poll. So what will happen is two people will go out to the car, and they'll be from opposite parties, and they will get the information just as if the person went to the checker to get their name and address. They'll verify that they're on the voter list, then come back with a ballot, and the voter will then fill out the ballot, and then it will be taken back into the polling location and inserted into the tabulator.
Do you need more volunteers? What are you hearing from other registrars, Sue?
I think at this point, if you're still thinking about volunteering, please call your local registrars and offer your name, because we don't know how COVID's going to be when come November. And if there's a spike, we may need all those extra people to come in and fill in for those that are sick and can't make it to the polls.
Denise Merrill, are you also hearing from people who want to volunteer? Are you directing them to the specific town they live?
We actually have a very active volunteer recruitment program. We've been working with, for example, the Bar Association to get attorneys and law students to volunteer to help out. The governor's office has a website. We've been directing people to that volunteer website. But we also have been telling people, to volunteer with their local officials, because the registrars are the ones that organize election day in each town. On the other hand, some people, would volunteer perhaps to work in a different town besides the one they live in, because that'll be, so that's a process that we're trying to go through. But again, it's mostly, we're telling people, contact your local registrars to volunteer on election day itself. There are many jobs that can be done. And actually, the colleges and universities across the state have also allowed their students to have the day off on election day so that they can go help out at the polls. And I think that's great, because I think, we need to encourage the next generation to participate in election day. And it's a great way to help out.
Michael's calling from Cromwell. Michael, what's your question?
Hi. Yes, so my uncle, who's 99, is in assisted living. He's blind. Who is authorized to fill out his ballot? Can I do this? Does it have to be someone from the town or within the assisted living facility?
It's a very tough situation right now, because so few people are allowed into the assisted living homes. But someone can give a family member permission to help them with their ballot. It has to be written permission, and there's a space for that on the document itself. But other than that, you can give permission to certain other people. And I think one of them probably are the people in the nursing home, but that's very carefully handled. We really prefer it be a family member. I don't know, Sue, if you want to comment on that, because normally we have what we call supervised absentee balloting at the nursing homes. And because we're not able to do that, we had to make special arrangements this year.
Sue?
Yeah, I was just going to add, because as Secretary Merrill said, we normally do supervised absentee balloting and take care of it. But under COVID, we have not been able to go into the nursing homes. So we've recommended to the nursing homes that it be family members that help their their family member out, and they'll just on the application just sign at the bottom that they're the ones that are assisting them, and then when the ballot comes, it's the same person that signed the absentee ballot that helps them out, so that it makes it easier for the nursing home to know who's helping them out.
Sue Larsen, we just have about 4 minutes left. We're getting questions from listeners who worry about if their ballot gets rejected. I believe before this bill was signed into law, there was some provision to if a ballot was able to be looked at in terms of the signatures, that there'd be a way to contact the person to avoid their ballot getting rejected. Is that still the case?
No, I don't believe that's the case. And that's going to be because of the fact that this is optional as to whether or not you're opening up the outer envelope, since some towns are going to be doing everything on election day, and some towns are doing things, some of the cities and the larger towns are starting to do that on either Friday night, Saturday, or Sunday, Monday, however they decide to do it, depending on the number of the ballots. It'd be kind of hard to say, well, one town's doing it and calling people and another town's not. So I believe all of us are going to be doing it consistently. If it's unsigned, it's under the normal circumstances where the voter will not know.
So it's important to remember to sign where you're supposed to.
That's the bottom line. The voter needs to take the responsibility, slow down, do it nice and slowly, read the directions, and do everything possible to follow the directions.
Denise Merrill, again, there's a flurry of activity, a lot of interest in absentee ballots this year. And, I just want to leave on this note, when we think about making voting as easy as possible, Connecticut still lags behind other states because we don't have early voting. These are other measures that could help make this system a little bit easier for people to vote.
Yeah, there's quite a few smaller things we can do, but I have been an advocate for what we call no-fault absentee ballots for many years, as well as for early voting. Our problem in Connecticut is that these require a constitutional amendment to our state constitution, and that takes years to accomplish unless you get a 75% vote in the legislature, which we have not gotten yet. So barring some constitutional amendment for early voting and no-fault absentee balloting, which effectively would allow us to do what we're doing this year into the future, and that can't happen. We could do, for example, a bill that was raised last year and didn't pass ultimately, which is at least let us do a sort of electronic email version of an application. I don't think we should have to mail applications on paper. People should be able to request them electronically and get one back via email. So that we still have not been able to do. We'd have to set up a system for that, for example. But we are kind of stuck in Connecticut without these other measures until we get a constitutional amendment and put these rules in statute where I think they belong.
And before we run out of time, someone did call in. We didn't have time to get to them. Can you withdraw your absentee ballot once it's submitted, Denise Merrill?
You can, under extreme circumstances, and that is allowed. Yes, you'd have to go in person, I guess, to request that your ballot back. And I've had that question a lot recently. Obviously, there's been concern about who's going to be on the ballot. Sometimes we have candidates withdraw and so forth. It is difficult, but it is possible. And
we'll have to leave it there. Denise Merrill, again, Connecticut Secretary of the State. We thank you for your time today, as well as Sue Larsen, again, Registrar in South Windsor, head of the Association for Registrars of Voters here in Connecticut. Today's show produced by Tess Terrible. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Thanks for listening.